Yeah, there were a lot of different reasons for it. At first, the U.S. Mission in New York was disconnecting from the State Department. Then at another point, the decision was handed over to Biden Tuesday afternoon, but he was at the funeral of a former Supreme Court justice, and they kicked it over to Wednesday. Now it's being kicked back again because of some of the lingering problems the U.S. has with language. There are four big issues I could see what we're calling this, how we're criticizing Hamas, how we're criticizing Israel, and the biggest one, which is who gets to inspect the increase in humanitarian assistance going to Gaza. UN wants to inspect it themselves. The Israelis want to inspect it on their side to preclude certain things from getting in. There's also questions of dual use items like fuel. This hasn't been worked out yet. And ideally, if the U.S. is going to approve or abstain, they'll have to work out some of these issues.
Well, we know that the U.S. remains a staunch ally of Israel, but there was a poll in the New York Times yesterday that showed President Biden is taking a hit for his handling of this war in Gaza, especially with young voters. And with the presidential election on the way next year, do you see the Biden administration's unequivocal support of Israel evolving or changing in any way?
Yeah, it hasn't really been unequivocal. This is the biggest dispute I've seen between a U.S. president and an Israeli prime minister in my lifetime. When Biden called the bombing in Gaza indiscriminate last Monday and didn't walk it back, when Blinken described what's going on in Gaza as gruesome, when Secretary of Defense Austin said it was a strategic mistake to go about it this way, and that there were better ways for Israel to defend itself. And then with all the new revelations about all the mistakes Israel made before the attack, including moving troops away from the border, tried to put them against, with settlers against Palestinians in the West Bank right before October 7th. The U.S. Lack of confidence and animosity even towards Netanyahu is growing, and the disagreements behind the scenes are there, even though the U.S. is trying desperately to signal again and again to the Israelis and to the world that it's on Israel's side, but the patience is beginning to wear thin.
We saw the leader of Hamas in Egypt today involved in these discussions aimed at a pause in the violence. Do you think those efforts, which are being mediated by Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S., will bear any fruit?
Absolutely. I mean, I wrote a piece a couple of days after this began, and this would all end with a Qatari negotiated settlement. That's where we'll end up. When it happens is the only question, and the details of it. But there was the meeting in Warsaw, which you mentioned, the meeting in Cairo. There's meeting talks in New York, and there's all kinds of other things going on. But it's quite complicated. You know, we need a pause. We need the hostages to be released against Palestinian prisoners at a different ratio than we had before, because a lot of these are IDF. We need much more humanitarian supplies to get in. And we need to talk about the future of Gaza, both how this war ends and then what we get after the war. And all of that's being negotiated at once. It's sort of a multi-level chess board.
Well, that's my next question. You know, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, continues to repeat that his goal is to eliminate Hamas. Is that going to be possible? And if not, how do you see this war ending?
It's not possible at all. I think you know, the Israelis didn't want this war at this time this way, and they sort of made up their objective at the beginning, and they're sticking to it. But eliminating Hamas became sort of eliminating the Gazan population as a threat, you know, and that went into these very extremist viewpoints, especially from the Israeli right, talking about basically kicking everyone out of Gaza, those that weren't killed and starved first. I mean, it really went overboard. So now we're starting to map out what a victory for Israel, at least in the Israeli view of itself, looks like. And that probably means much of the military leadership of Hamas dislodged, moved, killed, captured, etc. And then the Hamas reconfigured. I mean, the Americans want a Palestinian Authority to take over. It's saying it needs to be revitalized. But the personnel of it are going to be the same cadres that were working in Gaza before, who worked for Hamas, right? So it's just a question of who's in charge in the end. And I think we're already seeing signals of Israel's future declaration of victory when we see we've almost wrapped up operations in the north. We've captured or killed this many brigade leaders. We're having victories here and there. You're beginning to see the Israelis signal a partial victory, and then eventually they'll declare victory, because the Americans want this over in weeks, at least the hot part of this war, and the Israelis still think they need months. And so that's another one of the disagreements that has to be settled.